Good morning. Welcome to Cool Springs. Today is Sunday, July the 26th, 2026. And this is the last of our series on the VBS program that the Southern Baptist Convention, our denomination, put out called Illumination Station. Today's lesson is about Jesus, the proven Son of God, and it covers Mark chapters 14, 15, and part of 16. I'm going to stay here so that the microphone can pick up my voice, but I'll have a camera operator turn it to the board. Jesus, the proven Lord, because this section obviously is about Jesus' arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane, through his trials before the Sanhedrin, Pilate, Herod, back to Pilate, the crucifixion, and the tomb, and the fact that the women show up on what you and I now call Easter Sunday morning, and the tomb is already empty. And what we're going to look at today is look at all the people who were exposed to the truth about who Jesus is. The religious leaders, some of the soldiers, certainly ordinary people like Mary Magdalene, and how they responded or failed to respond to the actual truth. So in the Garden of Gethsemane, we're going to look at the arresting party, who was in it, why they were there. That name that you see there, Malchus, just below, that is the high priest's servant. High priest was too good, thought he was too important to go and do the dirty work of going out in the middle of the night after Passover to arrest Jesus. So he sent his servant along with the arresting party of guards and other lesser priests. And Malchus is the one who's going to get his ear cut off by Peter when Peter realizes there's an attack going on. And then you'll see below that Satan on his backside. And so I'll have the camera here for just a moment, because I'm going to be referring to these points throughout the lesson, but we're not going to stay on the board for very long, just long enough for those who are here in our live audience to write it down, and for those of you who are watching on camera to maybe freeze frame this and see it. So now we'll come back to the board, or to me, and we're looking at the Gospel of Mark, the account of Jesus' crucifixion. And remember a couple of major things. Mark is the first one to write a gospel, and his is the shortest gospel. He's telling the important, essential facts of the story. Other gospel writers, Matthew and John, who were also there, Mark was there at Gethsemane, because he's the one who's going to be grabbed by some of the guards. They'll grab his cloak, and he'll just run home out of his cloak in the middle of the night because he's frightened. But he was there. Luke is not there in person. Luke becomes a believer years later and is Paul's physician and traveling companion. But because Luke is a physician, he's into details. And so he's also a very careful historian. So all four Gospels are going to deal with the events of the crucifixion. Mark's going to write first. His is going to be the shortest. But to get the big picture, it's so good sometimes to go with the shortest account. So Mark makes reference to the fact that they've gone to Gethsemane, and that's the reason why he's there. The Passover meal that Jesus and his disciples have celebrated was at Mark's family home. He's a teenage boy. His parents were wealthy enough to have an upper room that was largely used for people to have parties in. And so they had the space for Jesus and his disciples to be up there celebrating the Passover. And Mark would have known when they left to head back to Gethsemane, where they thought they were going to spend the night there. And he followed them to see what was going on. Because teenagers, a lot of times, will like to see what's going on, even if it means sneaking out of the house when mom and dad think you're in bed, He wanted to see what was going on, and because he wanted to see what was going on, he was there to witness this. When the arresting party comes to Gethsemane, it includes Judas. It includes several military guards. There could have been up to 200 guards, the way the scripture account refers to the troop of people. There were also some priests, some members of the religious council who'd been there checking Jesus out, had been looking for things to accuse him of. They're there as part of the arresting party. And when they get to the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus isn't trying to hide behind some of those big trees in the olive grove. He isn't running. No, he goes out to meet them. When you look at all four gospel accounts together, Jesus has finished praying and he's woken his disciples up for the second time because they kept falling asleep on him even though he asked them to pray with him. And he's woken them up for the second time and he says, the time's here. And so he's actually going out to meet the arresting party. He's made up his mind that he's going to see the task through. He's willing to go to the cross. A few minutes ago in the garden, because he's fully God and knows what's going to happen to him, and because he's fully human, he experiences everything we experience. Luke will record later on from some of the eyewitnesses who were there that Jesus sweat drops of blood. There is a medical term for that. It's kind of a long term, but essentially the capillaries that are in our skin up on the forehead are very, very thin. That's why if you get an injury to your head, you'll bleed a lot compared to if you had the same level of cut or wound on, say, an arm or a leg. Skin's very thin there, and you can be under such emotional stress that your capillaries can burst and you literally will sweat drops of blood. It's happened periodically throughout history, people going into combat, that sort of thing, where they're under such tremendous stress that this happens to them. Jesus has already been in the garden, and knowing everything that's about to happen, and naturally the human side of him shrinking from the pain, the agony, the suffering, he prays, if there's any other way, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thy will. And the Lord has received an angel who has comforted him and basically given him just enough strength for this part of Jesus' own journey, where now everything he's planned to do from before the foundation of the world, before Adam and Eve even sinned in the garden, God knew what they were going to do. And God had the rescue plan because God has that much love for us. And now it's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. That here's Jesus, and he's ready to see it through. And that arresting party is about to enter the garden. And so he rises up, wakes up his disciples, and he goes out to meet his destiny. And so we're going to pick up the reading here in Mark chapter 14, starting in verse 43. Just as he was speaking, because Jesus had just woken up the disciples, just as he was speaking, Judas, one of the 12, appeared. With him was a crowd, armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, Rabbi. The term rabbi is a term of respect. It's acknowledging someone as a revered teacher. Rabbi, and kissed him. The men seized Jesus and arrested him. Then one of those standing near drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Am I leading a rebellion, said Jesus, that you've come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I was with you, teaching in the temple courts, and you did not arrest me. But the scripture must be fulfilled. Then everyone deserted him and fled. That's Mark's brief Reader's Digest condensed account. And remember, he's there. He's watching it happen. When we compare Mark's account with the later on accounts of Matthew and Luke and John, we discover some more details that are there. We know, for example, that it's Peter who takes his sword and cuts off poor Malchus's ear. Malchus is there, again, because he works for the high priest, but the high priest considers himself too good to get his hands dirty. I'll just send one of my minions to do my dirty work. So Malchus is there, and Peter has a sword, and we know that at least one other disciple, John, had a sword, because John's supposed to have a sword. At the Last Supper, John is the one who's seated on Jesus's right-hand side. It's his job from that position to protect the host against anybody who might do him harm. John's not going to draw his sword here, even though it's clear to everybody this group is here under the cover of darkness. How often do people who are spiritually dark want to do evil, dirty things and keep it hidden? All the time. These religious leaders, they know what they're doing is unlawful. They know Jesus hasn't done anything wrong. They've had 3 years of watching him do miracle after miracle after miracle that should have let them know he meets all the qualifications of what Messiah is supposed to do. Because they're part of the temple system, they've got the courthouse records. They know that Jesus is from the tribe of Judah and that he's a descendant of King David. They keep the records. So they know he qualifies bloodline-wise to be the Messiah. They also know, because that's recorded in those temple records too, his birthplace, Bethlehem in Judea, the city of David. He's descended from Judah. He's descended from King David. He's born in the right town, not only being from the right family line, the right town, and they've been expecting Messiah to show up somewhere in this general historical time period. Why? Because they've got Bibles that have what you and I call the Old Testament in there. And they know from what the angel Gabriel told Daniel in chapter 9 that it's about time for Messiah to show up. So they're looking to see if somebody should qualify to be Messiah. Then he's doing all the things that Isaiah said a Messiah would do, making the lame to walk, the blind to see, the deaf to be able to hear, the mute to be able to speak. And among other things, he's been raising people from the dead and healing people of leprosy, all kinds of diseases. They should have been able to make up a little checklist for the Messiah. What does the Bible say Messiah is supposed to do? What does the Bible say about where Messiah is from? And they should have been able to go check, 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 all the way down the list without anything being left unchecked. They have ample reason to know this guy qualifies to be the Messiah. They've heard his teachings. Part of the reason why the developers of this year's Lifeway VBS chose last week's lesson, which was from the Sermon on the Mount, was because the Sermon on the Mount is largely Jesus taking man's interpretation of Scripture and correcting where they'd gotten off track. He was teaching as one who had authority. Well, these same religious leaders who've sent their second-tier people to go do the actual dirty work of arresting, they've heard all those teachings. And what Jesus just said to them in the arresting party, day after day, in other words, in broad daylight, where other people were around, where there were witnesses to what you're doing. I was teaching in the temple courts every single day, and you didn't arrest me. But you're here under cover of darkness, because darkness spiritually needs darkness to do their dirty work. He's pointing out to them, he's giving them every reason, even now when they're standing in Gethsemane, ready to haul him off to an illegal nighttime trial, to know, fellas, you're doing wrong. And when you know you're doing wrong, when either your own conscience begins to bother you, or you've got people who are giving you godly wisdom and advice, and they're letting you know, don't make that choice. You'll be sorry. You're gonna live to regret it. That's wrong. You know it's wrong. All those ways that God, through people, through the Holy Spirit, tries to get our attention, Jesus is trying to get their attention. Judas has arranged with the religious leaders. He's got that 30 pieces of silver dangling in his pouch pocket. Pretty soon he's going to realize just how little 30 pieces of silver is. In his day and time, that was about $600 in our terms, which would have been a serious fortune. But he's very soon going to realize that money means nothing. In a matter of hours, he's going to take that money and throw it on the temple steps right at the feet of some of these religious leaders, because he's looking for forgiveness. He realizes a day late and a dollar short that he didn't mean for it to go this far. And he's going to get a cup of cold water in the face. He's going to try to give the money back. His way of trying to undo what he set in motion. And he's going to tell his co-conspirators, who are the priests, the religious leaders, the members of the Sanhedrin, the elders of the people, I've sinned. He's looking for forgiveness from the wrong source. Their response to him is a very cold, what's that to us? Excuse me. Some of these people are actual priests. What's a priest's job? To take the sacrifices that people are bringing, to inspect them to see if it's a good sacrifice, to offer it up, to be the mediator between God and men. So some of these priests telling him, well, you've sinned, what's that to us? They don't care about Judas's soul, because their own soul is so dark that they won't let any light in. They're still in the garden at this moment. Judas thinks they're going to arrest him and take him off, and he's going to pocket the money, but he's either hoping that Jesus will go ahead and proclaim himself as Messiah, or he's thinking surely they won't put him to death. When he finds out that Jesus is condemned to death, Judas is going to make the worst choice in history. Instead of marching up to the foot of the cross, because he could have done it. His co-conspirators aren't going to rat him out. The crucifixion's going to happen in broad daylight. But by then, they've got Pilate in a box, and the people won't be powerful enough to override Roman rule. So now they can stand at the foot of the cross and mock this dying man as he's dying. Judas could have marched up to the foot of the cross and told Jesus that he was sorry and asked for forgiveness. And if he had done that, Judas would have been forgiven. Jesus came to save the whole world, including the Judases. But Judas doesn't choose to do that. He chose to go out and hang himself. He's actually going to die before Jesus does. And he dies lost in his sins, unforgiven, because he simply didn't ask for it. But yet Judas had every reason to know that Jesus could and would forgive him. He spent 3 years with him. Malchus, the servant who's just had his ear sliced off, that's painful. Any kind of amputation would be painful. He could live without that ear. He wouldn't be able to hear as well. But the main thing is, by having his body mutilated in such a way, Malchus, servant of the high priest, would never ever be able to go into the temple courtyards again because he's got a defect. Why is that crippled beggar outside the gate when Peter and John, months later, will go and heal him of his disease? Because as a cripple, he can't go into the temple courts. He's defective. Anybody who had some sort of physical limitation couldn't go in. Malchus is a high priest servant. Normally he goes a lot of places that the high priest goes that ordinary people can't go. He's wounded. It's hurting right then. But it would eventually heal over, and he'd be banned from ever setting foot. Even in the court of the women, he wouldn't be able to set foot again because Peter has lashed out. Doesn't get talked about very often in looking at the crucifixion accounts. Wouldn't you think that Peter would have been taking that sword and charging as fast as he could toward Judas? He doesn't attack Judas, even though it's clear as a bell at this moment Judas is the one who is the betrayer. No, he's lashed out at the closest person, who happens to be poor Malchus here. And Malchus is bent over in pain, screaming, bleeding. And Jesus has to tell Peter, stop. Not the time for violence. Peter, haven't you understood anything that I've been telling you all this time? That I have to suffer and die. Put your sword away, Peter. And under Jesus' rebuke, Peter does put it away. And Jesus reaches out and touches Malchus, and Malchus's ear is restored. He's perfectly healed. He can go back into the temple because he's perfectly healed. You'd think anybody standing in that arresting party, not just Malchus, but any of those elders and priests, seeing Jesus heal once again and choosing to heal somebody who's part of his arresting party, somebody who came there with the intent to do him harm, and yet Jesus showed compassion to Malchus by healing him, you'd think that would get their attention. That maybe that would cause some of them to go, maybe we ought not be doing this here. But sometimes going along with a crowd is easier than stopping to say, hey, wait a minute, I don't think I want to be a part of this any longer. And Jesus is clearly not resisting arrest. And he's told them a truckload of truth there. They're being confronted with the darkness in their hearts. Every day I was at the temple, every day this week, answering question after question after question. You had an opportunity to arrest me if I've done anything wrong. You could have done it in broad daylight. Could have done it the right way. Why are you here in the dark of night? Why did you bring clubs? Jesus has never, ever gone onto attack mode. He has corrected people verbally, but he's never resorted to physical violence. Yet they're there with torches, with lanterns, with swords, and with clubs, and with an overwhelming force to come take one guy out of a group of 12 total people, because remember, Judas has flipped sides. So there's not 13 of them. There's only 12, Jesus and the faithful 11. And that force is overwhelming. They don't need that many people to come arrest one guy in the middle of the night. But that's what they did. And when Jesus went out to meet those people in the garden, on the board I had Satan on his backside. We're told from the gospel accounts that when Jesus spoke to Judas there in that upper room, as he is breaking the bread and dipping it and handing it to Judas, and he tells him, go and do what you must, that Satan has entered into Judas. Judas has allowed himself to listen to the dark side. Judas has made his decision to betray Jesus. So Satan's in the garden. He's in the heart of Judas. He's in the heart of a lot of those religious leaders who were there. Satan's in the garden. Not the first time Satan's been in a garden. The whole plan of salvation can be dealt with in the terms of 3 gardens. Eden, Gethsemane, where they are right now, and Calvary, where Jesus is going to be laid in a tomb after his crucifixion. Satan was in that first garden, twisting what God had said, getting Eve to think his way, Adam standing there doing absolutely nothing. Sometimes doing nothing is doing the wrong thing. And they took the fruit and they ate it, and sin entered the world. And that's why we need this second garden, Gethsemane, where Jesus has made up his mind. I'm going all the way to redeem mankind. And now Satan's entering the garden in the hearts of all these people who are part of the arresting party. And Jesus goes out to meet them. And the Gospel of John tells us more details than what Mark does here. The Gospel of John tells us that Jesus went out to meet them, and then he asked them a question. Who is it that you're seeking? And they say, Jesus of Nazareth. And he replies, I am he. And when he says that, John's Gospel, you can look it up in John 18 and 19. For now, just make reference to it. Everybody falls on their backsides. Who are you seeking? That's an interesting question. They should have been seeking their Messiah. They should have recognized their Messiah. They're seeking Jesus. They're telling that much truth. Who is it you're seeking? Jesus of Nazareth. Why are you seeking him? They are seeking him to arrest him in the dark of night because they're afraid of the people, those ordinary, uneducated yahoos who have put their faith and trust in Jesus. Those people who've heard Jesus' teaching and really heard it, not just with their ears and with their minds, but with their hearts. Those people who've decided that they believe in Jesus. Those people who've seen him heal, who've eaten the bread that he multiplied on the mountainside when he fed the 5,000 and another time when he fed the 4,000. Those people who've trusted the scriptures about who Messiah is. Some people were really seeking their Messiah. These people aren't seeking their Messiah. They're seeking to get rid of somebody who threatens their power and their position and their system. And when he says, who are you seeking? And they answer, Jesus of Nazareth. They're seeking him as somebody to get rid of. They're not seeking to turn their hearts toward Jesus. But yet he has proven time after time after time that he can do what Messiah was supposed to do. All of it. And then some. He has proven that he's from the right family, that he was born in the right location, that he's showing up at a time when they're expecting Messiah to show up. But they're not seeking to really know him and to make a decision on putting their faith and trust in him. They're seeking him only to get rid of him. And so what Jesus just did in the garden is knock Satan on his butt. They all fall backwards. And while they're down there on the ground picking themselves up, John's gospel will record that Jesus asked them a second time, who is it you're seeking? They're getting a second chance to get the answer right. And they still say Jesus of Nazareth as they're dusting off their backsides, as they're standing up, as he's willingly going with them, but he's in control of the arrest. And he tells them, if I'm the one you're seeking, you let these people go. He's not going to let them have Peter and Andrew and Nathaniel and Philip and Thomas and the others. They carry Jesus off. Then he goes before the Sanhedrin. They carry him, first of all, to the high priest's house. It's midnight or later. It's the wee hours of the morning. It's totally dark outside. Most of Jerusalem is sound asleep, completely unaware of what's taking place. Jesus is at the high priest's house. John gets in. Mark has run off without his coat in the middle of the night because they tried to arrest him as people were starting to scatter and run. And he just runs home without his clothes. Peter and John started to run, but they turned and went and followed that arresting party. And John gets in. He's very well acquainted with the high priest family. He knows people. John's the eyewitness who lets us know what happens in that trial before the Sanhedrin. Peter is behind enemy lines. He's out in the courtyard. It's night. It's cool. He's getting chilly. There's a fire in the courtyard. He's warming his hands by the fire. And he gets recognized by somebody he shouldn't have been intimidated by. A little servant girl. She's female. She's young. She's a servant. Strike 1, 2, 3. And when she says, you're one of Jesus' followers, he denies it. And somebody else is going to say, oh yeah, you look like one of his followers. You talk like a Galilean. You're one of his. He denies it again. He denies it the third time. When he denies it the third time, the trial's over with and they're getting ready to haul Jesus out to take him to Pilate because they want a death sentence. But Peter's out there warming his hands by the fire. And he's got opportunities to stand tall. And he fails. But the good news is, Jesus is going to forgive him. Jesus is going to restore him to office. We learn from the mistake of Judas that as long as you have life and breath, you can't do anything wicked enough to where God won't forgive you. But you do have to agree with God's opinion, and you do have to ask for his forgiveness. Judas's tragedy is that he chose not to ask for forgiveness. But he knows he's sinned against Jesus. And by now he knows his co-conspirators aren't godly people at all. They may hold offices and titles and get respect in the streets, but they're devils in clerical garb. And he now knows it. And instead of running to Jesus and saying, I'm sorry, all he had to do, he decides to take his own life. What a tragic loss. Peter's going to deny knowing Jesus 3 times. And he's going to immediately regret it. And after his resurrection, when Jesus meets Peter and some of the other disciples back up in the Galilee, Jesus lets him know, Peter, you've been forgiven. Peter, you've been restored to office. Why does Jesus tell Peter, feed my sheep? He's letting him know, Peter, God can still use you. Peter, you have value and worth. Peter, your sins are covered. But while Jesus is on trial before the Sanhedrin, they're asking him questions. And remember, these are people in the ministry. These are supposed men of God. And what are they doing? They've brought in people that they have paid to lie because they want to have something to accuse Jesus of. They tried. They'd been trying for 3 years to find something to accuse him of. This last week, as he's been at the temple in broad daylight every single day, they've tried to ask him every theological trick question they could come up with to get him to say something that they could accuse him of. And they failed miserably. So here are these priests, these elders and leaders of the people, the ones who interpret the law for other folks. They're paying liars to lie, but they can't even get that right because they don't get the liars to agree on the same lie. Give them a script. Do something. Give them a script. They couldn't get the liars to agree on the same lie, and they're asking questions. And finally, after they've done things like pull on his beard, spit in his face, slap him around, remember, these are men of God. In the garden, all Jesus had to do was to say, depart. And they wouldn't have been able to do anything to it. He really could have called 10,000 angels to wipe out that arresting party on the spot. But if he avoids the cross, he avoids paying the sin penalty for you and me. And he loved us enough not to avoid the pain for the guarantee of there are people who are going to love me. I will redeem them. They're worth it to me. Jesus is standing there and allowing them to be physically abusive to him, to say all kinds of manner of evil things about him, to slap him around, rough him up. People in the priesthood roughing him up. And finally, the high priest, who is exasperated, asked him a question. If you're the Christ, tell us so plainly. And Jesus responds with, I am. We read it in our English Bibles, and it doesn't knock us over like it should. Because this one clearly knocked over the high priest and all the members of the Sanhedrin, because what Jesus is using is God's sacred name. You want to know if I'm God? Yes. Yes, I'm God. That's what he's saying. And the high priest does something he's not supposed to do, according to the law. You can go look it up in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. If the high priest tears his robe, which is a sign of mourning, he's forfeited his office. The high priest just tears his robe. What need do we have of witnesses? Blasphemy, blasphemy. But you see, they knew better. Because he's already backed it up. He's backed it up with the circumstances of his birth that nobody can control. This coming week is my husband's birthday and my birthday. Our birthdays are 2 days apart. Neither one of us had any control over when we were born, where we were born. We're conceived in our mother's wombs because our parents engaged in marital activities, and 9 months later, here we come. We don't have any control over when we're born, where we're born, to whom we are born. But yet Jesus qualifies, and they know it because they've got the records. They've already searched the records. They can't mess with him about his pedigree. They know he's qualified to be the Messiah, Lion of Judah, descendant of King David, born in Bethlehem, David's city. They know he qualifies. They've had their minions running around for 3 years watching him everywhere he goes. They've seen him heal people. They've heard his teachings. They know he qualifies. But they don't care. They don't want to be confused with the facts. They want him dead. The problem is they don't have the legal authority to give a death sentence. They have to involve Pilate. So they're going to ship him off to Pilate in the middle of the night. Pilate's going to have to be awakened. And Pilate, the actual highest ranking official in the whole region. He's been appointed by the Roman Senate and Caesar over in Rome to be Rome's man in charge of Judea. And these religious leaders, because it's a holy time, it's the time of the Passover, if they set foot in Pilate's house, they think that will defile them. We couldn't finish celebrating the Passover and first fruits and unleavened bread if we set foot in this Gentile's house. Never mind that we've just lied our way into an illegal nighttime trial. Never mind that we've sent an arresting party. Never mind that we've been bullying and physically beating on this guy. Oh, but if we set foot in Pilate's house, we're going to break a religious rule and we won't be able to finish our Passover and our first fruits. So they have to ask Pilate to come out to them. Been around the military because my husband was a soldier and I worked for the military as a civilian. The junior people don't make the senior person come to them. When the senior person walks into the room, everybody snaps to attention. You don't sit until you get permission to sit. They're asking Pilate, the governor, to come out to them because they desperately need a big favor from him. But they still think they're better than Pilate. They're too good to set foot in his house. Pilate's going to talk to them. Pilate's going to talk to Jesus. Pilate's going to interview him privately. Pilate's going to ask an important question to Jesus. What is truth? But Pilate isn't going to hear with his mind and his heart the answer to his own question. Every time Pilate is asked what to do with Jesus, Pilate says, I don't find any fault in him. He hadn't done anything worthy of death. The man is innocent. These religious leaders aren't going to have it. We need him dead. You're the only one who can give us permission to make him dead. So they wind up threatening Pilate. We're going to report you to Caesar if you don't let us have it. And Pilate uses some of their own customs, that custom from their Levitical law about what do you do if you find somebody outside your city gates and they've been murdered and you don't know who did it. You have to carry a sacrifice out there and you have to wash your hands swearing that you don't know who took this person's life. So Pilate sends for the bowl of water and he's washing his hands of it. You're the one who wants him dead. He hadn't done anything wrong. And they're saying, let his blood be on us. They know they're guilty, but they don't care. They're that deeply in darkness. What's this lesson about? The fact that Jesus is the proven Lord. He's proving it over and over and over again by willingly going to the cross, by telling the truth about who he is. The high priest, in his role as high priest, I demand that you answer this question once and for all. Are you the Christ? I am. High priest wasn't prepared for that answer. And he only wanted Jesus dead. And all of his minions want Jesus dead. And now they've put Pilate in a box, and they're saying, let his blood be on us. Okay? You just admitted you're guilty as all get out. You admitted it to Judas when you said, we don't care about your sin problem. We're supposed to care. We're the priest. But we don't care about people's sin. We care about hanging on to our position. They just admitted to Pilate, we don't care that he's not guilty. Let his blood be on us. Because you see, if he had done anything wrong, they would be saying, he's a sinner, he deserves to die. They don't say that. Let his blood, his innocent blood, be on us. Be careful what you ask for. Sometimes you just might get it. Pilate relents. He's not guilty. But I'm washing my hands of it. And really, Pilate, you're not as off the hook as you think you are. Because Pilate, you had your chance for a one-on-one with Jesus. And Pilate, you didn't wait around for that answer to the what is truth. Pilate, you handed him over. Every individual one day has to confront, what did you do with Jesus? Pilate thinks he's washed his hands of the affair. Hey, they said let his blood be on their heads, but Pilate, you're not off the hook because you had a personal choice to make. You made the wrong one. So did the religious leaders. At the crucifixion itself, loads of evidence to anybody there. The Roman soldiers, those religious leaders who were there at the crucifixion, the ordinary people who were just passing by on their way into Jerusalem for this feast, the people who love Jesus. Because what happens at the crucifixion? There is Jesus being loving and forgiving, even hanging on the cross. Making sure that his mama's taken care of. Promising that repentant thief, today you'll be with me in paradise. Man's getting eternal life. Hadn't got time to get off the cross and go get baptized or have communion or restore the property that he's stolen 4 times over like the law says. He's dying on the cross. But because he realizes I messed up, because he realizes I'm guilty and I need salvation, and most importantly because he asked the right person. Remember me when you come into your kingdom, Jesus tells him, today you'll be with me in paradise. That guy's going to be forgiven. His other thief buddy, I'm going to die the way I lived. And he's going to go straight to hell because that's what he chose to do. But those people standing there at Calvary, when the sky gets dark at noontime and stays dark, when Jesus dies and at the exact moment that he dies, 3 p.m., they would understand the significance of that. 3 p.m., it's time for the sacrifice over in the temple. The lamb is being slain right then, precisely 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And this big whopping earthquake comes, big enough to tear that thick temple curtain, which is as thick as a person's hand from the tip of their middle finger to their wrist. That curtain is torn from top to bottom because of the shaking that's going on from the earthquake. Anybody on that hill who had any doubts left should have had them over with. Whoa, Nelly, what's happened here? But in spite of all this evidence of seeing how Jesus is dying on the cross, how he's forgiving people from the cross, seeing nature itself mourning the darkness and the earthquake, some of them, particularly those religious leaders, are still going to refuse to accept that Jesus was that Messiah. Even the Roman centurion, and by the way, he's risking a lot. His men go back and they tell the higher military officers, hey, the centurion, our captain here, said that this guy that we just put to death really was God. That centurion could have been relieved of duty in a heartbeat. He could have lost his whole career over that. But he at least was honest enough to realize, I've seen plenty of people die before, because that's part of my job. But this is different. That centurion is convinced either by Jesus' words or by the darkness or by the earthquake or by all of it combined, surely this man was the Son of God. But still there were people on that hill who refused, even with that evidence, to believe that Jesus was that proven Lord, that Messiah. And then we come to the tomb. The religious leaders go to Pilate once Jesus is dead, and they ask Pilate to give them a squad of soldiers to guard that tomb for 3 days, because they're afraid his disciples are going to come and steal the body and tell people that he's risen from the dead. And Pilate must have been sitting there going, you've got to be kidding me. But it's gone this far. Whatever. You take the guards. Go ahead. Make the tomb as secure as you know how. And they do. They have a squad of soldiers guarding that sealed tomb. But what do we know from the first 8 verses of Mark chapter 16? Jesus goes into the tomb before sundown on Friday because he's got to be in the tomb before sundown. They had to get him and the other 2 thieves dead and off the cross before sundown. Why? It'll mess up our religious festival if there are bodies hanging there. We've got to get them in the ground. Okay, break the other 2 guys' legs. Get them in the tomb. Hurry it up. Speed up the execution. They're in the tomb. They have to wait out from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday because it's a Sabbath. We're being religious. We're going through the motions of worshiping God. The God that we just put to death and we abused on the way. We're going through the religious motions. We're putting on the holy show. And of course, sundown Saturday, it's dark. You're not going to be moving around in the dark. So, at dark 30, crack of dawn, Sunday morning, a group of women are headed toward the tomb. Kind of dangerous for women to be walking around at night by themselves, or even in small groups. They can be attacked and overcome by men. Great harm can come to them. But at the crack of dawn, they're on their way to the tomb, and they're not there with the palm branches to cheer for the risen Lord. They're carrying spices. They think they're going to finish the job of preparing his body for an honorable burial. But the tomb is empty. The stone's been rolled away. There was another earthquake. Earthquakes are followed by aftershocks that last for sometimes days. No more guards. Earthquake, aftershock, rolls the stone away. Tomb is empty. The grave clothes are there, but the tomb's empty. And Mark's gospel records the women being afraid. They don't know what's happened. They're going to figure it out very quickly. Some of them are going to have encounters with Jesus very quickly. But those guards, they didn't run. They've experienced earthquakes before. Those guards were on duty, guarding that tomb just like they were told to, like they were being paid to do. And when the earthquake revealed that the tomb was empty, boys, our job's over with. We're supposed to be guarding this tomb so that nobody steals the body. But the body's not there to be stolen. What do? They go to the people who paid for them, the religious leaders, and they tell them the truth. Those religious leaders who had all the evidence of Jesus being from the right family tree, born in the right place, born at the right time, doing all the things Messiah is supposed to do, teaching with authority. His tomb is empty. On the 3rd day, they asked him previously for a sign, and he said, the sign you'll get is the sign of Jonah. As Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the earth. Well, it's the 3rd day, and that tomb is empty. And the guards that they paid to be there are telling them the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Jesus has proven every way possible who he is. And some people still refuse to believe. Those religious leaders, they want to hang on to their position. They're going to lose it anyway. In about 30 years, the Romans are going to have that temple knocked down, scatter all Jews throughout the rest of the Roman Empire. They're going to lose their position anyway. And if they don't repent, they're going to die in their sins. I've had the enormous privilege of being able to make more than one trip to Israel. And on my very first trip to Israel, I had a chance to go to the Israel Museum, where they have lots of artifacts, including one, we would call it a casket. It's an ossuary, a bone box, that archaeologists discovered in the city of Jerusalem. And it has an inscription on it that lets us know that it's the bone box where the bones of the high priest, the one who tears his robe, the one who allows Jesus to be slapped and spit upon and mocked, Caiaphas, the high priest's tomb was discovered by archaeologists. And it's on display there. His bones in the tomb. Where's Caiaphas been for the last 2,000 years? Unrepentant Caiaphas in hell. If he repented, even Caiaphas can be in heaven. But if he didn't repent, he's in hell. Jesus is the proven Lord. You can take the scriptures and you can put them to the test. Many skeptics have tried. And you have a decision to make. Are you going to accept the overwhelming proof that Jesus really is the Messiah and the one and only source of your salvation? Are you going to put your faith and trust in him? Or are you going to choose to be like all these people we've looked at today who had evidence on top of evidence on top of evidence, and they chose to die lost in their sins? Don't make a fatal mistake. Thanks for watching.